Okay, so today we're going to go kind of take our thinking and reverse it in 4-5C. Today we're going to start with a graph and we're going to get to an equation. So typically we've started with an equation, we went to a graph. This time we're going to reverse it. So for this first graph here, we want to first identify the amplitude. The amplitude is how high I go from the midline. So remember, the midline is not always the x-axis. It's basically what splits the graph on the horizontal axis. In this case, it is the x-axis, but it's not always. It's going to be the distance from the midline to the max. In this case, this distance is 10. So our amplitude will be 10. The period is basically how long it takes for the function to start over. So say we start a starting point and we say our starting point is up here. How long does it take for me to get to another max? Well, it kind of cuts off a little bit, but it looks like it's about 4 pi. So in order for me to go from 0 to another max, it's going to be 4 pi. Okay. So if it's 4 pi, the phase shift, the phase shift is really determined by what trig function we're using. In this case, it says find it in terms of cosine. Okay, so cosine starts at a max, like up here. It looks like I didn't shift it to the left or right at all. So I'm going to say it's 0. So what I want to do is I want to come up with an equation that looks like this. Y equals a sine of bx plus c plus d. Or you could say bx minus c. I'll say plus or minus here. All right, so we know what our a is immediately. We know that a is 10. So in my equation right here, I'm going to say 10 cosine. I don't know why I did. Let me put this back here. Erase for a minute. Okay, sorry, I had to correct that there. We're talking about cosine here. So let's go ahead and make sure that that is a cosine here. Okay, so we have 10 cosine of, we need to have basically bx plus c. There is no d value. We're not going up or down at all, so we're going to say plus 0. So basically what I want to know is I want to know what b is. If I remember that period is equal to 2 pi over b, and I know that my period is 4 pi, then what I'm going to do is set 2 pi over b equal to 4 pi. If I multiply by b on both sides, you get 2 pi is equal to 4 pi b. Divide by 4 pi, divide by 4 pi, and what I'm going to end up getting is 1/2 is equal to b. Okay, so I know for sure that inside my parentheses here, it's going to be 1/2, which is b, x plus or minus c. Now, the best way to find this plus or minus c is to do this. Traditionally, we would just say it's going to be the opposite of what we see. So if I saw like sine of x minus pi, I would say that this thing got shifted to the right pi. But it doesn't work if x has any sort of number in front of it other than 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to isolate x so that x only has a 1 in front of it. So in the case of cosine, it's cosine of 1/2 x. I'm actually going to put parentheses before the x. And whatever is left in this parentheses here is actually going to be whatever my phase shift is. So in this case, my phase shift is 0. So we're really not going to have to deal with it too much on this one, but we will in the next one. So the answer for this one, is going to be 10 cosine of 1/2 x. Technically, we'd say plus 0. All right, let's try the next one. Okay, so for our next question here, we're going to take a look at this graph. The first thing I want to look at is the amplitude. The amplitude is the distance from the midline to a max or min. In this case, we can see the amplitude here is also 10. The period is how long it takes for the function to start over. So in order for the function to start over, say I start here, the distance it takes for me to get from here to here is pi. So my period is pi. My phase shift is really determined on am I in sine or cosine mode. They want me to make a sine function, so I need to remember that sine starts at the midline and then it goes up. So I'm going to find a point where sine starts at the midline and goes up. Technically, this happens a lot of places. It happens here, it happens here, it happens here, and it happens here. I'm going to go ahead and focus on this point here, though. That's where my starting place is going to be. But there are multiple answers to this question. My phase shift is basically going to say how much did I get shifted to the left or right? Well, technically, sine is supposed to start here, so I must have gone right pi over 2. Okay, so we want to start the equation. It's going to be 10 sine of, let's go ahead and find b. So to find b, I know that 2 pi over b is equal to the period. In this case, the period is pi. If I solve for b here by multiplying by b, I get 2 pi is equal to pi b. Divide by pi, and I get that 2 is equal to b. So what I know is the inside here is going to be 2 times, if I want to take account for my period shift, I'm going to actually try to make an expression on the inside that has a coefficient of 1 in front of x. The reason I want to do this is it's going to skew my phase shift if I don't put extra parentheses here. So if I want to put my phase shift in, if we're going right pi over 2, I'm actually just going to subtract pi over 2. And this right here is going to be the solution. So once again, for that phase shift, if you have a b, any other b that's not equal to 1, you're going to have to do this double parentheses trick here to get your full equation. Okay, so for the next question, we're going to go ahead and once again identify the amplitude. The amplitude in this case is going to be, I don't have my pen on, is going to be 2. So the amplitude here is 2. The period is how long it takes for me to start over. So say I start at this low point here, and I end at this low point here. I went a distance of 0.33, and it went all the way up to 0.67. So we're going to say that's probably 2/3. So the period here is 2/3, 0.67. Phase shift, well, if we're dealing with cosine, I'm actually going to approach this kind of a different way. You could pick that this right here is your starting point for cosine. You could have a phase shift of 0.33. I'm actually going to go a different route and maybe make this a little bit easier. I'm going to say my phase shift for cosine is 0 because I'm going to say this is my starting place of cosine. The way to make cosine start at a minimum instead of a maximum is to flip it across the x-axis. So I'm actually going to write that this is -2. So my amplitude is still the same, but if I make it negative, it will flip it across the x-axis. -2 cosine of, let's go ahead and find the inside. Remember that 2 pi over b is equal to my period. My period is 2/3. If I cross multiply here, I get 6 pi is equal to 2b. And that means that 3 pi is equal to b. So I know that 3 pi is going to go out front of x. And in this case, I have no phase shift. So on the inside here, I'm just going to say x plus or minus 0. So what I'm going to get here is -2 cosine of 3 pi times x. That's if you were to flip it across the x-axis. You could also do the same thing if you made your phase shift positive 1/3. But I think this option is easier. Okay, on to the next question. So this next question is different because we definitely went up or down on the x-axis. What I'm going to do first is establish my midline. I want a line that separates the highest point from the lowest point exactly. One way to do this is to take the highest point, which is -1, and subtract from the lowest point, which is -7, and then divide by 2. So what we're going to get here is -8 divided by 2, and so the midline must be -4. So I'm going to draw my new midline at -4. So this is going to split it in half. From there, I'm going to figure out the amplitude. The amplitude is the distance from the midline to the highest point. In this case, this distance is 1, 2, 3. The period is how long it takes for me to start over. If I start here at 0 at a max, I get back to a max after 1, 2, 3, 4. So the period must be 4. The phase shift for a cosine function. Well, cosine already starts at a max, so this phase shift basically says I didn't move to the left or right at all if I'm already starting at a max. All right, so let's go ahead and make this equation. I'm going to go ahead and put my amplitude out front, cosine of, all right, let's go ahead and find b. 2 pi over b is equal to 4. 2 pi is equal to 4b. So pi over 2 is equal to b, which means pi over 2 gets multiplied to x. So I'm going to get pi over 2x. There is no phase shift, so I'm going to say plus 0. And then we're going to add our final touch, which is the vertical shift. I'm going to subtract the entire function by 4. All right, so for this next one here, we can see automatically the amplitude is 1, 2, 3. The period is, well, if I start here at the midline and I'm going down, the next time I start at the midline I'm going down is over here at 4, so the period must be 4. If I have 2 pi over b is equal to the period 4, I get 2 pi is equal to 4b, and so what I get is pi over 2 is equal to b. My phase shift here, we're talking about the sine function. Well, the sine function typically goes up from the origin, and right now I'm going down. So there's two options here. Either A, I could start here and go up, or I could take the negative of the sine function. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and make a phase shift. So the phase shift here, normally sine starts at the midline and goes up. So I'm going to say my phase shift was right 2. Okay, so let's go ahead and start this. We're going to get 3 sine of, okay, I know b is pi over 2. And I'm going to make sure x has just a coefficient of 1 on the inside so I don't have a messed up phase shift. If I'm going right 2, that translates to minus 2 on the inside here. And this right here is the solution for the next problem. Okay, so these next problems are kind of similar to what we've been doing the whole time, so these ones aren't too difficult. All we're going to do is graph a sine function that has been shifted down to. So our amplitude here we can see is 1. The period of sine of 1x is 2 pi over b, which is 1, so it's 2 pi. And my phase shift, we don't have a phase shift because there's nothing on the inside here. The only thing we do have is a vertical shift. And the vertical shift says we're going down 2. So let's go ahead and graph this. Okay, so to graph this, what I'm going to do is first I'm going to set up a new midline at -2, like this. So I have a new midline at -2. Sine starts at the origin, and then it's going to go up 1. So we'll say we'll go up 1 because that's my amplitude. Go back down to the origin. Go down 1 because that's my amplitude, and go back up to the origin. So this right here is the sine graph that's been shifted down 2.